listening to Let's Talk About Ethics with me, Evie Wenting. Welcome back to Let's Talk About Ethics. I'm your host, Evie Wenting, and today I'm super excited about this conversation. Joining me is Adam Turteltaub, a longtime leader in ethics and compliance space, host of the Compliance Lives podcast, and someone who's had hundreds of conversations with compliance professionals around the world. Adam has unique perspective, not just from compliance, but from advertising, government, and years of shaping how we think about ethics in practice. And today we're going to talk about what he's learned from those conversations and where the profession is really headed and what organizations still might be getting wrong. Welcome, Adam. So happy to have you here.
My pleasure. It's nice to be on the other side of a podcast for a change.
Yes, giving you a voice is an amazing opportunity for me. So thank you so much for taking it on. Today, I wanted to ask you, you've hosted hundreds of conversations with compliance professionals. What is one story that has really stayed with you and why?
Wow. From the podcast or from people's careers?
You've had hundreds of conversations with people. It doesn't have to be limited to the podcast.
I think there's a few things. It's hard to say one. Some of it is the people who've just gone to hell and back dealing with solving complex issues with their organization. I think another thing that strikes me is just the range of issues that there are out there for organizations to deal with, from the big things that we know, like in healthcare, Medicare reimbursements, and the corporate sector of CPA for both privacy, to things like rules about compliance challenges you may find with the art your company has on the walls, to your corporate jet. But overall, I think the thing that strikes me the most is how good the people are in the profession and how alone they are in the profession, and that they're trying to do the right thing for their organization, the really strong commitment to ethics, integrity, staying within the law, and how lonely a job that can be. And I don't think there's very many other jobs in the corporate sector that, or even the governmental sector or higher ed, that are similar.
I hear a lot from professionals, and I've certainly experienced fair share of it too, is the burnout, right? You hear that a lot when it comes to compliance professionals because we are in the way programmed to staying the course of ethics and compliance and lead with integrity. And sometimes you meet with many obstacles. I hear about that a lot.
Yeah, no, it's a big problem, and it's not a job where you see the best of the organization every day. Excuse me, you see the worst of it a lot, and it's hard to remind yourself of that, and that for every one incidence of wrongdoing, there's thousands of incidents of right doing that you can may have played a role in or not, but it's going on all around you, thankfully.
Yeah. I think these kind of conversations and connecting people in compliance is really important because then you don't feel so alone, right? Because everyone
Absolutely.
has some of those issues.
And I would say along those lines, years ago, I did a project. This was when I was still in marketing for a psychiatrist who had a stress reduction project. And he was telling me about therapy. And he said the first step in talk therapy is normalizing that most of the things people come to a therapist for are pretty normal. And it's just taken up disproportionate role in their head. And you have to show them that no, what you're feeling is normal. And I think in a lot of ways, whether it's listening to one of the podcasts I did or going to a conference, it's a giant act of normalization.
Yes. So after all these conversations, what do you think the compliance profession still gets wrong today?
I still think a lot of people are overly focused on the rules and the regulations and not on human behavior, and
Yes.
recognizing that we're not in the compliance business so much as we're in the affecting human behavior business. And that's our job, is to try and get people to behave differently. And that means taking the time to learn what really does drive the way people think and act.
Yep. So that leads into my next question perfectly because that's my opinion as well. For the last 20 years, we focused on the hotlines and the policies and the code of conduct and the annual training, and we don't utilize our managers. From what you have seen and heard, how often do compliance issues really come down to managers and not knowing what to do in the moment? I hear that a lot, but I'm curious to see what you've heard.
There's a lot of things. I mean, there's obviously the bad managers who pressure people to just get the job done, and the ones who are focused too much on their own incentives. I always say whenever we look at risk assessments, we should look at what the organization's incentive plan is, because that's a roadmap to risk. You're telling people what they're going to get rewarded for, what they're going to be penalized for, and that's where they're going to be testing the limits. A lot of it is a manager who doesn't know what to do, or the manager's not bought into the program or too busy to deal with things beyond just getting the factory going and keeping it going. So I think we need to get them more involved. Marjorie Doyle always used the term the mushy middle to describe the managers and what their role is. But studies show middle management is the most squeezed people in any organization. So getting their attention is difficult. And I think the answer is probably helping them to see that even though we're asking you to do something, in the end, it's going to save you a lot of time and make your job a lot better, is
Right.
if you do what we're asking.
And I feel like companies may expect certain things of managers and may even go as far as putting it in the code of conduct. But one thing that I repeatedly see or don't see is that companies actually take time and tell those things to the managers because, like you said, they're very busy. They're so squeezed by their employees and then the leadership team because they're there to produce things, but we don't really spend enough time. Have you come across the many compliance professionals you spoke to that they worked on creating a space for really talking to the middle managers and expanding their knowledge in compliance and all these various things that would be helpful in changing the behavior?
Yeah, I think there's been a few through the years that I think the one thing that they've had very strongly in common is an ability to think creatively, to go beyond the traditional and make it so that it's something that they aspire to. For example, I just did a podcast with Nadège Rochelle, who was at Johnson in Europe. And she talked about a previous job working with a woman named Susan Roberts. They created what they call compliance addicts, where they actually had managers competing to get badges, and having them was a source of pride. And it just talked about during the sales meeting, there wasn't any time on the agenda. So she set up like a trade show booth in the foyer, and it was mobbed over time because she had the tools to engage people. It's the ones who are good are the ones who take advantage of thinking outside the box, but also thinking about, okay, what's going to motivate them? What do they care about? And how do I make compliance relevant for them and something that they see as a benefit? What's odd about this, maybe a longer answer than you wanted, is compliance is a lot like advertising.
I
I
was gonna,
spent,
yeah.
yeah, 13 years of my life. When we worked in advertising, everything was also about human behavior and getting people to buy something or to consider something or remember something. And that's what compliance is. It's getting them to buy into the organization's values, it's getting them to act one way or the other. And I think a lot of the tools we used in advertising would be very effective for compliance programs.
Yeah, I said that on the ethics verse at some point. I believe that in the way compliance team members, compliance professionals need to become salespeople of compliance to know how to spread the message across the organization. One thing I believe it's like changing right now too is the young people who are coming into the workforce who perceive things way differently than what my generation did just because they grew up with devices and instant knowledge and everything is at their fingertips. So I think we also have to think about those things. Who's coming in and how can we tackle their messages? So innovation in compliance communication is really important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people, it's not just the younger generation, even oldies like me expect everything to be accessible from their phone.
Yeah.
And also when you look at entertainment, people have gotten hooked on reels on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, and very short clips, and trying to get people to sit down for a half an hour is very difficult for them these days.
Right.
So to the extent that you can make your message fit with the way people are used to consuming information, the better off you are.
So, from your advertising experience, would you have any tips and suggestions and things that you've seen around that you can share with us?
Yeah, there's an exercise we used to do at, I can't remember which agency anymore that I was at, that I think is a really good one, which is designed to get you to think not from what you want to say and have to say, but get the other person's perspective. So what we would do is sit down and write down for a consumer, and here, do it for a manager. So let's say you want to do training on privacy, and you have a problem that people aren't logging off their computers enough and leaving their computers unattended. So write down what you think a person thinks currently about that issue. So you probably write something which is like, I know they want me to log off every time, but do you know how exhausting it is having to log back in over and over again each day, and the process takes forever? I know it's be helpful, but it's just too much work and not worth it for what little risk there is. Then write what you want the person to think after they've gone through your training, seen your video, read a note, whatever. And you probably want them to say, you know what, I guess the risk is a lot greater than I thought, and it is worth the effort. Or maybe the answer is, you know what, it really does take 2 seconds and I'm just making this into an excuse. Whatever you want them to do, then say to yourself, okay, what communication is going to get me from where I started to where I want them to be?
Mhm.
And then look at what you come up with and then ask the hard question. Am I doing that or not? Am I throwing in extra stuff that they don't need? And it also may identify things like, wait a minute, if they say the complaint is it takes forever, let's talk to the IT department to see if there's a way we can make this faster. Is there something more complicated than there needs to be? All those kinds of things can help you think better, address the issue better, and also, oddly enough, look to Madison Avenue for an answer to a compliance program.
I think that would also require, when you are on the compliance team, working across your organization and having friends, that you've extended olive branches, not when you have to, but creating friendships that you can ask those kind of questions. I know it has helped me in my career always get some things done if I had conversations before we really had to with the people at the various departments. So that's, you mentioned IT, but it's HR, it's many other
Yeah,
department.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You don't want to try and make a friendship in the middle of a crisis. It's much better to have it beforehand.
Yeah, that's an excellent line for this podcast. You don't want to make a friendship in the middle of crisis because that's usually would not turn out so great. So my question here now is actually about you and your future. So you've currently launched your new podcast. What inspired you to create it? What mission and a vision you have for it? What you're hoping to it serves and that maybe wasn't addressed before. If you can take us through vision.
Yeah, so when I was at the association, I did 800 plus episodes of the Compliance Perspectives podcast. They were all basically 5 questions, 10 to 15 minutes. Each one focused on a legal or ethical risk area or an element of a compliance program. And I looked at what I had done and what others were doing, and I realized that there was space to create compliance lives, as I call it, which was just a conversation with a compliance officer about their life in compliance, what got them into the profession, what keeps them into the profession, how they get through the hard parts, what they think we're doing. Like you asked, what do you think we're doing right? What are we doing wrong? What could we be doing better? And then let the conversation flow where it takes us. After having a very sort of regimented, structured format, I like the freedom to say this podcast can be 20 minutes, it can be 40 minutes, or somewhere in between. And it's been really interesting for me hearing what people have to say about their lives. And what's been really interesting is as I posted it, I said, if you want to do a podcast episode, let me know. And a dozen people instantly emailed. So clearly compliance people want to be able to share their life story and are happy for that opportunity. And I'm happy to give them a platform to do it.
That's excellent. So just to clarify, people who are currently in compliance roles in an organization are the ones right now that you're looking
Right.
to, you're
I
looking.
think over time I'll add people on at the vendor side because there's a lot of them who were compliance officers and even those who weren't, but have been parts of the profession for decades. And frankly, that was mine. I never worked in house as a compliance officer. There's a lot of people who've been of great service and have seen the profession evolve. And they too face the question of, do I want to keep doing this or should I pursue something else that might be more lucrative
Right.
or appeal to something other aspect of my identity?
Okay, great. Thank you. So we'll look forward to your hearing your podcasts. And one final question, what tip or best practice for a compliance officer would you leave with now? What would you want to share? Like one thing that you think everyone should be thinking of or doing that could help them in their journey?
I think always think about, this goes back to what I talked about earlier, is what's in it for them. Always try and think about how do I make what I have to say something that the employees will think is in their advantage too, and
Great.
understand that. And if you can make it so that they can see a benefit, they're much more likely to do what they're supposed to.
Great. Great advice. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My
I
pleasure.
really, my pleasure to have you on, and hopefully we can revisit in a little while to see how your podcast is going. But thank you again.
Thank you, Evie. Take care.
Two words: confidentiality of investigation versus transparency. How, in few words, how should someone who it has to investigate any matter, and we when we come to compliance investigations, they're all sensitive, right? There is not sensitive matter, but people also want to know. So how do you navigate between those two?
Very good question. Like I said, investigations come with buckets of risk. A big one is a reputational, which is where confidential, of course, legal in some cases, how you maintain confidentiality. Because again, like I said, if you're trying to build trust, not erode it, you have to protect not just the reporter, but the person or the persons reported. They also deserve confidentiality. But people think confidentiality ends with the person who has reported. No,
Oh, great point.
even the person who has been reported deserves and is entitled
Mhm,
to privacy, to confidentiality. I
mhm.
tell people that internal investigations are not reputation destroying activities. That's not the business, the company or the organization is not in business to destroy employees' reputations.
Mhm.
It's there to find out what has gone wrong and to fix it and to make sure that accountabilities are held properly, but it's not to destroy. So that is why I always say, though a lot of people say, oh, we want their names, we want them hanged on a stake, so to speak, we want them hanged publicly, but we say no. You always have to maintain confidentiality on all sides. So how do you maintain it? First, it starts with, like I said, your policy. Tell people how you would keep their reports confidential, how you will keep the process, even after it has ended, confidential. So confidentiality does not end with when you've completed the investigation and then you are free to start talking about it. No, it survives the investigation until it's at a good point where you can share not every detail, but just enough. And the principle we always apply is on a need to know basis. Need to know is your anchor, like I said, your compass for confidentiality is need to know. Who needs to know? Because
Right.
not everybody wants to know. We all want information for whatever reason, but who needs to know? So again, like I said, your policy would have set out those who manage the process. If it's in a standard organization, it would be the ethics and compliance. But let's say you don't have ethics and compliance, or it's the legal team or it's the HR team, whichever team is vested with the authority to manage investigations. That team, first of all, is a need to know. They're on the need to know. And then within that, you then know the people who support the team, who are they, and the processes through which they onboard people into that process, how they maintain. So, for example, you're bringing someone in from a different function to support an investigation. We have something we call a little nice disclaimer, and almost like I even call it. It's almost like something, a certification of some sort, let me put it that way, where we say we will welcome you, we thank you for supporting this investigation. A quick reminder on your responsibilities on this investigation. Confidentiality. If you have questions, this is the person you reach out to. Don't ask just everybody. If you are struggling with something, so we give FAQs and we let the person sign up to say, I have understood, I will abide. So that again keeps people on the straight and narrow to say, if any leak is traced to someone who is part of the investigative team, clear consequences. And those consequences are embedded in our policy. So in our policy, we have what we call the Living the Code policy. And that code just speaks, amongst other things, it says, if you, and I'm just summarizing, or paraphrasing, if you do anything that impacts negatively the investigative integrity, the process of the investigations, it's a no-go area. And the sanction standard stipulates like minimum and maximum sanctions that can be given. And breach of confidentiality during an internal investigation is a serious one. So again, you communicate that it's not just back, it's bite when it comes to confidentiality. You breach it, you feel the pain, so you don't do it next time.
Yes.
It's not something you get a slap on it. So you do that, and then you also make sure that for confidentiality, you are reassuring people. People are always going to be scared. That's the biggest thing. You might be saying, look, we will keep it confidential, but don't just say we will keep it. How will you keep it confidential? So you have to tell them, you have to take them through the process. First, we are limiting. Your report comes into a specific team. It is limited to that team that is assigned to that investigation. And then we're going to say, if people are going to support us, there's a process through which we onboard them that also preserves the quality of the kinds of people that support that process to preserve confidentiality. And if we hear, because humans, we're not going to be perfect, so you have to give room for someone going outside the box. If someone violates confidentiality, we invite people to report it. It's a violation of the policy itself. So we invite people to tell us about it, and then we investigate thoroughly. And if it's found that it was breached, there are sanctions. So we also publish reports that have been investigated where people breach confidentiality and where they were sanctioned. So we could really see that there's bite.
Yeah, you just said report. That's amazing. So while I was getting my master's in corporate compliance, one of the class was on investigation, and we went through some of the processes. But at the end, we talked about the transparency part, right? Which was something that I asked. And I think some companies do a better job than others actually now reporting to the employees. What does the hotline compliance call volume looks like? What are the topics? So we talk about confidentialities, nothing specific, it's shared, but I think employees are still curious to know what kind of issues do we have? Is it all manager favoritism issues? Is it all tardy issues? Is it all, nepotism? Is it all bribery, corruption? Like, what is it? And a lot of companies still shy away from giving some information. So I think there should be some kind of a report. And I think in my class, we came across Unilever, and you have a website where you do, I don't know if you still, because it's been a couple of years, but back then we actually did a case study and looked at your website on the information that you published, which was really nice. You had an entire website, and it would give you, and then you could play around and give it by region and give it by the time period you wanted to see, and you could kind of see if it was all the same or different. And I think that's important as a part of the transparency, because
it's a critical thing that organizations continue to struggle with. So I don't think one organization has the magic one to that. I think it's an evolution of how much transparent can you get, and the higher you can get, the better, while still preserving, of course, our values and principles. So here's something that I would suggest, and I think this will cut across industries, like I said, not limited to a specific organization, because it will vary from organization to organization. So but there are general principles that we can all agree work, regardless of your industry, regardless of the size of your organization. So one thing is, if you have reports going to your board, to your management team, you already have something you can share with employees. There's no reason why the board can know something and your employees don't know it.
Great point.
You should, I mean, that in itself is favoritism, because you're like, so why is it, there's certain things, of course, business strategies that might not be non-public, but when you're talking about cases that have been investigated, it involves employees. They need to know, because that's how you let them know that you're doing the right thing, and they need to trust that you're doing the right thing. But if you expect, organizations think that by just saying we've done it properly, employees must take that as gospel. No, you have to win trust. You have to build trust. It's not something you immediately inherit because people have started working with you. Trust is not something you buy through employment. It is something you earn through consistent actions and transparency. So one easy thing leaders can do or functions can do is the EC, if you have a fully fledged EC team or legal team managing it, they can give you a redacted version of whatever is being shared on a quarterly basis, to say on a quarterly basis, these are how many cases were reported. There are minimum levels of information that employees can have, and you don't need to go into detail to earn trust. They don't need you to start telling them everything. They only need to know, like you said, where are we seeing the issues coming from? Are we seeing consistent sanctioning across work levels, or are we just seeing only junior employees being sanctioned and there's nobody senior being sanctioned? Those are things people want to see. So what you do, you first of all talk about how many. So for example, you take a period, a year, quarterly, whichever, monthly, whichever period of time the organization wants to share the information for. Then you go to the types of the policy that you have. So maybe, for example, you have 10 policies. You want to show out of that 10 policies how many cases you have under each type of policy, because then people start to map issues to policy. You are actually training people while sharing information. You can actually use one stone to kill many birds in this regard. So you are mapping the issues to policy. People then start to correlate action to which policy it is, which helps in the education bit of policy making. And then you then go to the frequency of it. So for example, maybe you're having more safety violations rather than, you start to know automatically that that's where the higher risk is. People can immediately get that. And then you go to how they reported it. Was it anonymously reported, or was it with full disclosure? That tells you again how much people trust your system. So if you have very high levels of anonymity, that is a sense that we need to do more in building trust. And then you look at the functions involved. So is it coming more from supply chain? And supply chain in which region? If it's a multinational company, you want to see. But if it's a small company, you could see, is it coming from the sales team? Is it coming from the supply chain team? Is it coming from the finance team? It gives that, that view. And then you go into substantiation, very important, substantiation rate. So out of, for example, let's say 50 cases reported within a quarter, how many of those cases after investigation was substantiated and how many was not? So when you share that, the next level then is for the substantiated cases, how many led to sanctions? People want to see the results where people with, what happened.
Exactly. Who's getting fired?
Who's getting fired? That's the real question people want to get down to. That's the real juicy gist everybody is always excited about. Who's getting fired? So we always say to people,
I'm sorry to interrupt, or we have another one. Who's going to be in the next headline is really now popular, right?
Who's going to have the focus on them? So what we do is to make sure that we condition people's mindsets, not to think that once you've violated the company policy, the next step is a termination, because people always go from, hey, whatever it is, this person has been reported, I'm expecting the person to be walked out shamefully out of the organization. It doesn't work that way, because there is a range of sanctions for different types of violations. And there are violations, and I always say this to people, in reaching a determination on outcome or sanction, there's always what we call mitigating or aggravating factors. And that makes sure that it's a fair process, because you might do the same, two people might commit the same violation, but there are differences in the motive, in the circumstances. And that always has to factor in. If you go to a default, you violated discrimination, boom, you are not going to get that perception of organizational justice or fairness. So it's always about, are you looking at the mitigating? Are you looking at the aggravating factors in reaching, a decision? And at the end of it, what I've seen helps a lot of people is when you say the work level. So for example, you say, we investigated even like an executive level employee, and that person, without names, of course, no names, no nothing, but you just say, okay, by work level, for example, if you say junior, mid, senior level, and you say maybe, for example, 3 terminations, 5 warnings, 1 whatever else sanction, and you show that it cuts across, your investigations are holding senior people accountable just as much as it's holding junior level employees accountable, it builds that one stroke builds trust.
So not this year yet, but last year by this time, actually by May, there were about 2 companies that were in the headline just for that. One was Kohl's, that somebody they investigated the CEO for improper personal relationship with the vendor, right? And that was a story, and he was asked to resign. And then there was Nestle, who actually, for similar reason, and I don't know the details, but from what I understand, an employee reported on a hotline call. So can you imagine that investigation? That is wild. But I guess it is encouraging when companies take action when there is a need for it with the high level employees, right? Like that speaks a volume to the company culture. I wrote down another thing as you were talking, and the thing that I was thinking of is every complaint that comes in, it's in the way a training opportunity for someone. And I mentioned my integrity playbook with the employees, and managers thinks that they're expert in policies, but when you talk about specifics of the conflict of interest or even gift and entertainment policy, and when you translate it to the day-to-day on the spot decisions, their confidence is actually very low. So here with this, I would say a compliance team should look at all the different calls that and all the different cases that are come in, and obviously with all the levels of detail stripped down, but it comes to an issue of what happened, and use that as a training opportunity so it doesn't happen again. Because I think that is the gold training that you could give someone. Policy is a policy, and they can recite the policy a lot of times, but actually know how to apply it is a gold. Hence,
I think it's 2 things you are touching on, and that's absolutely valid. So in basic ethics and compliance framework, you look at the prevent, detect, and the remediate, right? So prevention is about the training, the education, and then the detect is about, do you have hotlines to pick up issues? And then remediation is what you're speaking to, because that's really where the investigation falls into. Investigation starts with the investigation itself. Then what happens after? So after that is sharing the lessons learned, which is where we're saying, of course, we'll be transparent, you share the lessons learned. But what is even more important is identifying the gaps that the investigation has revealed. Because I say to people, organizations are not in the business of investigation. They're there to make profits. This is not what they're going to spend. They want to spend all their time doing. So you want to make sure that you are not investigating the same thing over and over, because you're not closing the gaps. So again, we call it remediation because you identify. So in the investigation, and we can do this again because I think there's so much value in this process that I don't think this podcast gives us enough time to really, really go in depth. But we can always talk more, share more details with people who want to have it. But let me summarize to say, your investigation of the claim or the report itself, it will have an investigation report template. As part of that template, you will then have not just the issue, the policies impacted, the people impacted, and details of the people. So where are they working? Who is their line manager? How long have they been with the organization? Like full details that allow you to have a full view of who the person is, not just by name or what they've done, but who are they? and how much training have they gone through. We even check how much training they've had. So have they been taking their annual training? We check, because that gives you a view already as to the person you are dealing with, right? How many investigations they've been part of shows you whether this is a repeat offender or not. But like I said, we could have the whole day talking about
That's
investigations.
amazing.
But let's wrap up to say your investigation report template, apart from describing the issues, the people involved, the policies violated, etc., and the outcome, you must always have a section of it that speaks to lessons learned and gaps to
Amazing.
be remediated. And as part of those gaps, you will then see, for example, maybe the policy hasn't been, there's no policy, for example, or if there's a policy, it wasn't really circulated, there wasn't an awareness, employees didn't know. I'm just giving an example. And then you then do what you propose to management to fix. So you can say, for example, I would propose that a new policy be put in place, or maybe the policy be revised, or maybe this person be given additional coaching, whatever it is that closes the gap long term, not short term, long term, that prevents, the aim is to prevent you having to do that investigation on the same matter again because you didn't do it properly. So that's a different and the most, I would say, important process. Apart from instilling trust, it's about making sure that the business is sustainable into the future. And how can it be sustainable? When you identify the gaps through the investigation, you remediate. People focus on sanctions only. Investigations don't just lead to sanctions, they lead to opportunities for the business to fix what they didn't know was wrong and to fix it as permanently as possible.
Excellent. So on that note, we will end. Thank you so much. We have so much to talk about. This is definitely first of many. I enjoyed spending my time with you, and I look forward to the next one.
Me too. Thanks for having me, Evie. It's been really great as always.
Thank you.